All right. So we've talked about pretty much every single component, every nutrient, right? We talked about carbs, healthy fats, protein, fruits and vegetables, dairy, right? All the key components, what their functions were, what examples of them were. So now that we know what every nutrient does, and we know some base level examples of each one, even we kind of went into, if you're going to a grocery store, what are some really quick and easy examples you could essentially grab and buy to incorporate in your meals and snacks. Now we're going to kind of go into how to develop what I would call your performance plate. Okay. So over these next three videos, we're going to go over three different examples of performance places for the performance plates based on the type of activity and training you're doing or your specified goal. Okay. So you can kind of see here, this gives you a really quick and easy visual structure of what a performance plate should look like, what food should be on the plate. It gives you examples on the left-hand side, things to include around the plate, which in this case would be fluids, right? You don't just hydrate during one time of the day. You have to hydrate all throughout the day. Hydrate at each meal, always bringing some type of fluids with you in between the meals, at training, at your apartments or your house, if you're out and about. So that way you're always hydrating and being hydrated leading up to the activity or training that you have that day. But then also when the training's done with, you sweat a lot during that training time. We're going to replenish those fluids that we lost, that we sweat off. Okay. So that way we can get back to normal body weight and make sure we're in a great position for possibly the next training session in that evening or the training session that may be going into the next day. Okay. So you can see here, right? The title on the top says it's a hard training day, right? So if you have a day where you're training twice a day, if you're training, an hour and a half to 2 hours, or in this case, if it's twice a day, let's say you train in the morning, afternoon, and you're training 2 hours a day, right? That's going to require more energy for the training. And that's going to require you to replenish more energy that you lost from the training so that you could be prepared and ready for that next bout of exercise or activity that you have that's coming up in the second half of your day. So you can see specifically in this plate, half of the plate is carbohydrates because we need that fuel. It's going to be critical for us physically, so we have enough energy, but also mentally. Okay, a lot of guys forget about having enough carbohydrates for the brain, right? To concentrate, to focus, to listen, pay attention, be able to react within seconds or very quickly based off what a coach is coaching you on, based on what your teammate is saying to you, what the opponent is throwing at you on the opposing side, depending on if it's a court or a field or whatever your sport specifically is, right? If we also don't get enough carbohydrates and we're in a position where we have a very long day of training and exercise, right? We also put our muscles at risk for getting fatigued faster. We get fatigued faster, our risk for cramping can go up. All right. Our risk for muscle pulls and muscle strains can go up because our muscle is fatigued. It doesn't have the energy and the nutrients it needs to be able to carry out the load or stress that's being put on the body, right? And carbs also help to protect our muscles. So if you're taking in minimal carbohydrates and then you're going into a very hard training session, and again, we talked about that fuel tank. If your fuel tank is now running low or running out, the next best thing your body's going to do is try to get energy from somewhere else. Fats are going to take a while. If you're not getting carbohydrates in between the training session, right? Now we're not getting any that could be absorbed quickly through the gut, to the bloodstream, to the muscles. So the next best thing is going to be your muscle. So now we put ourselves in a position, not getting enough carbs, all right? Or we didn't fuel appropriately leading up to the training or for the next training. Now we're going to start using that muscle mass as energy. And then that's going to be counterproductive. If we're starting to use the muscle for energy, that's going to affect our strength, our power, our speed, right? Our energy levels and our ability to output the level that we expect of ourselves and that our coaches and anyone else that's working with you is expecting of you. So I cannot say enough how important for an athlete carbohydrates are. You're going to see a lot of stuff on the internet about going low carb, no carb. Doing a ketogenic diet, I am telling you right now that carbohydrates need to be your best friend as an athlete. They're going to play a critical role in making sure that you can be able to perform at your best, recover at your best, and then be able to do what you do best as an athlete for your respective sport on the court or the field. Now, another thing that comes into play with this specific plate as well, right? If you're an athlete that needs to gain weight, okay, typically eating more carbohydrates is going to be a little bit easier than eating a half a plate of protein, right? Protein tends to digest slower, right? It could fill you up faster. So if you eat half a plate of protein and you only eat a quarter plate of carbohydrates, right? You're probably not going to get as many calories in from, maybe depending on the cut of meat, right? Like if it's a high fat meat, it's going to be more calories than a leaner cut of meat. So again, bear with me. But if you can eat a half a plate to 3/4 a plate of pasta, right, with the protein, with the fruit and or vegetables or both, now you're hopefully getting in that large amount of calories that you would need at the plate, on the plate, at each of those meals to try to get towards your goal. So it could be a little bit easier eating a larger portion of carbohydrates to get more calories in to help with that specific goal. Now, also, the way you eat the food on the plate can also make a difference on whether you're going to finish the plate and on whether how full or how fast you get full. Okay, so sometimes I recommend to athletes eating certain foods first before others. Most athletes, I don't typically have to tell them that protein is important or to get protein on their plate. From my experience so far, usually they're always getting protein, they always have it on their plate, and they always want more. So that's typically not an issue that I'm ever worried about. It's always getting enough carb options and it's always getting enough fruits and vegetables. So I would say play around with what food you eat first and what foods you eat last. I personally had a really good experience with athletes. Eat your carbohydrates first, then go with your vegetables, and then finish your protein off last. Most guys and girls always love the protein, so it's typically not an issue if they save it for last. A lot of times it tends to be the favorites in that case. We get the carbohydrates down, we get the fruit and vegetables, which typically are the hardest to eat first, or hardest to get an athlete to eat. So if we get those down first, leave the protein for last. The order in which you eat those foods can make a big difference. And when I talk about plates, right, I always ask, any athletes I work with or any people I work with, what percentage of your meal you're eating. You can see all these percentages on here, right? 50%, 25%, 25%. That all equals up to, if you ate all the food on that plate, that would mean you ate 100% of your plate. So if an athlete tells me, oh, I ate 50% of my plate, or I ate 75% of my plate, that's where some of those questions, right? If you're an athlete or if you're a dietitian or if you're a practitioner following this, that should throw off some red flags up in your head to say, okay, they didn't eat 100%. So the next answer isn't, oh, good, at least you ate something, which it's great. If they at least ate something, that's better than nothing. But the next questions need to be, well, why weren't you not able to eat 100%? What's affecting your appetite? Why are you not hungry? Was it the order you ate the food? Was it you had poor sleep? Is something off? Is your mood off, which is making you not hungry to have an appetite? Are you tired, fatigued, exhausted from the activity or training, which is making you feel like you don't want to eat too, so you don't have an appetite? You got to ask a lot of these different questions to yourself as an athlete, or if it's a practitioner doing this, asking the athlete some extended questions to see why they don't have an appetite and why they're not finishing their food. So that way you can come up with some different options for that athlete to try to change at the next meal or try to change the next day. So that way they are getting as close as they can to eating 100% of their food. So we can maximize and make sure they're getting enough of calories they need throughout the day to meet their specified goals for them as an individual athlete and especially for their sport, right? Every sport, every athlete's going to need a different amount of calories depending on the season they're in, right? So you're probably going to need the most during the season, right? Because of the amount of physical stress that's getting put on your body, the amount of load that's getting put on your body, and just the amount of activity that you're doing, right? If you're going in the off season, it may go down because you're not training as much, because you could be going from 20 to 30 hours of activity to maybe now 5 hours of activity. So that means you now need to adjust your plate and what foods are on it, which we'll continue to keep talking about as we transition. into talking about these other two plates that we'll go into. So again, to kind of tie this all up, if you're training at least an hour and a half, hour or more, especially if it's an intense hour, or you're an individual that their goal is to try to put on some more weight, this would probably be the goal plate that I would attend you to try to eat. And again, it could be if you have practice in the morning, eat the hard train plate, breakfast and lunch. And then maybe you do a medium or a recovery or a low plate in the afternoon. Maybe you're a person that can't risk that. You have a hard time getting enough food in. So you may have to do this plate Monday through Sunday, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? It's hard for me to tell you exactly what the portions you need to eat, exactly how much to eat. Everybody's going to be different. A lot of it's a lot of trial and error, to try to guide the athlete to the best possible position where they feel the best on a daily basis and they perform the best on the field or court.